Welcome to CBC News BC on an election special. After a week, more than a week of waiting, wondering, counting, and refreshing the page on Elections BC's website, we now have a result to share with you. I'm here with my municipal affairs colleague, Chad Pawson, and here's our camera that we're going to be looking at right now. Things are moving very fast, very fluid right now, but CBC News Decision Desk is able to project the NDP will form government in British Columbia. But we cannot say if it will be a majority government or a minority government yet. Again, CBC News is projecting the NDP will form government in BC, but we do not know whether it will be a majority or a minority, with two ridings left to call. Those two ridings, which CBC News is still waiting, our projection desk is still waiting to find results on, to finalize results, are Surrey-Guildford, very close race, and Courtenay-Comox on Vancouver Island. We are able to project two other results. NDP candidate Dana Lajeunesse is projected to win in the riding of Juan de Fuca Malahat, another close race which expanded a lead for the NDP later on as the counting went down. And Conservative candidate Christina Lowen is expected to win in the riding of Kelowna Centre, another very close race. Chad Pawson, anything that stands out to you so far from the results that we've seen? We've all been refreshing.
Yeah, I think it's been an incredible day. That it's been a day where Elections BC had to count more than 22,000 absentee votes. So these are the votes that people may have made in a riding which wasn't theirs, but we have a policy in this province that you can vote at any riding, so they had to count all those. Elections BC started at 9 a.m. hourly updates counting these absentee ballots, and they're a tricky count because they have to first verify them. They have to verify that the person had not voted in some other fashion. So it's not quickly counting votes as we sometimes see on election night where we had results piling in very, very quickly. This was a slower count, but we've gotten to the place now where, you know, we're able to project that yes, the NDP is going to form some kind of government here with at least 46 seats. So whether that's a minority pairing with some kind of agreement between the two Greens that are elected, or do they still get the one more seat? So as we know in Surrey-Guildford, we're talking about an incredibly tight race.
In fact, let's look that up
matter.
right now.
Yeah, Dan, I mean, you have the numbers here before you. Why don't you say what we're at with Surrey-Guildford?
So at the moment, according to Elections BC's website, the NDP have 8,911 votes in Surrey-Guildford. The Conservative Party have 8,893.
Okay, so that's a difference of 18 votes.
18 votes.
Now, over election weekend, as you know, that lead was actually in the Conservatives' favor.
That's
with
correct.
a 103 vote lead in that riding. Now, counts over the weekend reduced that. We got down to within, I can't remember now what it was.
12
votes
as of Sunday.
As of Sunday. So we got the NDP really, really closed. And now we're seeing with these absentee votes, they've managed to flip the seat. But we also went from like 14, then we went down to 9. Now the NDP is back up to 18. And we believe that there's around maybe between 55, 75 votes left to count there. So all those are going to matter. And then of course we'll get into it. But any riding that is decided by less than 1/500th of the vote will have to go to a judicial review, a legal oversight to make sure that all the ballots were properly counted, that the count was done. So, you know, we're still within that range where we might see several of those, which could take a couple of weeks. But CBC obviously able now to project, and we believe that we will have some of these results as we go later today that will maybe to be a bit more specific about what kind of government's coming our way. But there's still other things in play here.
And there's been so much mathing behind the scenes by Elections BC, but also by our producers here and the CBC News Decision Desk. Then again, we do not elect people, we project winners based on the results that we're getting from Elections BC. And it is a slow process, as we've seen. We have not had a provincial election this close since 2017, and this is closer than that was, Chad, because that ended with 43 seats for the then BC Liberal government, 41 for the NDP, 3 for the Greens, and that played out eventually with a NDP minority government.
Yeah, and we're into, that was an incredibly close election. Of course, I'm sure you, as I remember working that night where we were in uncharted territory in our era of being journalists, that we'd never seen anything like that. And it was ongoing for a week before we had some type of decision. And then election night here on October 19th, a lot of us saying in the newsroom, here we are again. It's 2017 vibes, as our colleague Mira Bain said on election night. And here we are again. It's just showing that BC has always been a place where elections have been very tight and hard to call, but we're really seeing a polarized electorate where they this election pitted a desire for change from an NDP government that's been in power since 2017 over, David Eby being premier for 2 years. Were some of the progressive legislation that he passed seen as an overreach? And so we really saw that playing out in the election, that a desire for change from this party, BC Conservatives. We must give them credit that they assembled a campaign in a very short period of time. They managed to run a candidate in every single riding, and that they pushed the NDP to the brink. It really says a lot about where politics are at in BC, because people are caring deeply about issues, of course, about affordability, healthcare, and public safety. And these were sort of the key issues that were fought over this election. And it's incredible to see that it's come this close, that here we are on a Monday, almost 10 days after the election, hanging on hourly updates from Elections BC that are giving us, handfuls of votes per hour difference that we're seeing it play out.
And especially when we're trying to figure out as well, and doing some interesting math, where we're trying to figure out how many votes are still left and whether or not there is a threshold for, as you mentioned, judicial recounts, automatic recounts in some ridings, as we saw Surrey City Centre, and I believe that was also Wanafuk and Malahat, where there was a judicial, not a judicial recount, but an automatic recount. Remind us again what goes into, quickly, a judicial recount. Who's in charge? How does it work?
Yeah, so this is now down to the Supreme Court, BC Supreme Court, where they have to, within a few days, announce when and where they will do it and how it will play out. And then they need to provide results within, it's about a 2-week period. And so it's not just counting the votes, it's making sure that the ballots that were counted were appropriate, that they were sealed appropriately, that they were opened appropriately. There's a long list under BC's election acts about how it takes place. These ones become automatically. Candidates can also request them.
That's
so
correct.
We'll have to wait and see if there is a candidate out there that doesn't agree with the way the counting or recounting or all these counts happen, and if they request a judicial review from BC Supreme Court. So we could see that playing out as well. I think the interesting thing here, Dan, that we need to remember is that we had these automatic tabulators in ridings. So the system was a lot more streamlined. We had these systems that are widely regarded as working and very good, and they've counted our votes. And we've seen from the recounts, not a lot of movement in some of the ridings where the recounts happen or partial recounts happen. So what I take away from that is it means that the tabulators are doing good work. We had a BC Conservative Party official who went and did some observing at some of this recounting, saying there's nothing untoward here. We agree with the work that's going on. It's looking like everybody is doing good work here, and that the technology and Elections BC is working. So, I mean, those are really good takeaways. So what would a judicial review find? Well, I'm not sure that it would find enough to turn over some kind of these election results, because we've seen the results between the initial count and some of the recounts be very close, within handfuls of votes. So I think that's very fair. So what will they find? But I mean, this is part of our process by law, and I think we've learned a lot in the past 10 days about how not strict, but just very
To the book?
To the book, Elections BC needs to be with the legislation on paper, that we can't go quickly here, that these things have a way in which they're done because of our laws in BC. And I think as voters in a democratic system, and we should be proud of that, and both leaders speaking to let Elections BC do their work to properly figure out these results. And we've seen that now, but of course now in a position where we're getting down to it, where finally, we're within the last few hundred votes of coming into some of these ridings, and I think everyone's been waiting on this, and it's been incredible. I think the buy-in from people, residents, voters in BC, that people really are concerned about this election. People have been following it for the past almost 10 days, when you think about it. The Saturday night, we went late into the night, and we didn't get a result, and that's hard for people who are voting, who just want to know who's going to form a next government.
That's right. From one Chad to another, Chad Possum, we appreciate your time and your analysis. Stay with us. We're now going to go to Chad Skelton, former Vancouver Sun reporter, data journalist. Can we call you a pioneer, Chad? I mean, maybe just because you were the first one to do it?
Sure, I was the first one to crunch the numbers this week.
There you go. Take the credit where you can. Chad, we now have a result, at least from the CBC News decision desk, and an NDP government. We don't know whether it's majority or minority, still waiting for votes to come in. What's your reaction as you see the numbers right now?
So, I mean, it's not much surprise what happened today. The NDP had gotten very, very close in Surrey Guildford, and it was likely, I thought, based on looking at past voting patterns, that they would pick up enough votes today to sort of finally get over that last little threshold. In general, I was surprised at just how well the NDP did in the late counted votes. The piece that I wrote earlier this week was sort of saying the NDP usually does better in late counted votes, but not, I was predicting they wouldn't do well enough to actually flip any seats, but they actually did surprisingly better, even better in the late counted votes than they did in 2020, when a lot of people voted by mail and the partisan split was particularly large. So something different happened this time. My best guess is that it wasn't just that they were counting mail-in ballots this time. They used to count all mail-in ballots late. Now they count just late mail-in ballots late. So there might be something actually different about who leaves their voting to the last minute, and maybe procrastinators are more likely to vote NDP.
And interestingly, that we, despite that, we saw a record number of people, according to Elections BC, vote in advance voting. What do you think that says?
I mean, this is a trend that I think we've seen all over the world. I mean, I was looking at some of the U.S. results as well, and the advance voting numbers are very, very high. I think in the U.S. it's often more because it can be so difficult to vote on election day. The lines can be so crazy long. But even just in my own personal life, like, I was surprised how many people I talked to that said that they voted ahead of time, and I was like, well, why? You're around, you're not going on vacation. I think it's almost just to kind of like, I can get it done early, it's easy, I don't have to worry about the lines on election day. Although, funnily enough, I mean, just for future voters, the anecdotally, it seemed like people were waiting longer advance voting this year than voting on election day, because so many more people did it than they expected. You actually had to wait longer if you voted early than if you voted on election day.
One of the writings, and we're talking about it now, that is still outstanding according to our CBC News decision desk, is Surrey Guildford. Both Chad Pawson and I have been reporting there, was there yesterday, talking with voters, and you heard everything from housing to drugs to global warming, concerns around candidates, etc. From where you saw, take us on a little journey around what happened in Surrey Guildford, because that ended with just over, I believe, 103 votes on election night. And Gary Begg, the NDP incumbent, asked for a recount and initially was told no.
Right. So what's happening here, and there's multiple things going on at the same time, so we have to make sure that we keep them clear in our heads, or try our best that we can. So this actually has not to do with recounts. I mean, what's interesting, one of the things I predicted in my post on Tuesday, and I think has actually turned out to be the case, is that the recounts don't seem to change much. Of the places where we've had recounts, if you just look at the recounts, things have changed by like a couple of votes. And that's not surprising, because we had electronic tabulators this year. And so, machines are pretty good about counting votes. And so it's not surprising if you do a hand count afterwards, there aren't that many mistakes to find. What's shifting things is actually these late counted votes. And so primarily that is mail-in ballots that arrived very late. So if mail-in ballots arrived by the last day of advance voting, they were counted right away and they were included in the election night count. But if they arrived after that, they were part of what was counted over the last few days. And then a few absentee ballots in ridings that didn't have good internet service, and so they weren't able to knock people off the election rolls right away. And it's really the mail-in ballots that made that shift in Surrey Guildford, because the NDP did remarkably well in late counted mail-in ballots this time, better than they've ever done before in 2 decades. And so that was just enough. It's going to be very, very close, but just enough probably to tilt the Surrey Guildford seat from Conservative to NDP.
And that's the first flip that we've been able to project, at least, pardon me, so far. Also, though, we're waiting on updates in Courtney Comox. This, of course, is the lower of 2017, where that was the riding. We were all waiting and refreshing computers until very late or very early in the morning. Where do you see that one? I'm not asking for prediction, but what is the data telling you?
I mean, I'm happy to make we're late enough now. I'm actually quite comfortable making a prediction. I think Surrey Guildford will
fire away.
Surrey Guildford will almost certainly switch from Conservative to NDP. It has already. I think it's going to stay that way. I don't think there's enough votes left to count for the Conservatives to snatch it back. And in all the other ridings, the margin's too big now compared to the number of votes that are left to count. You would have to, I mean, technically in some of these ridings, you can say there's more votes than the margin, but you're not going to see every single vote that's left to count in Courtney Comox go NDP or similarly in some of these ridings that the NDP is holding now for the Conservatives all of a sudden get some huge batch of 100% margins or something like that. So I think Surrey Guildford is the one riding. It probably will switch. I would put lots of money down that none of the other ones will switch now.
How do you think Elections BC has done when it comes to providing those updates, that information. It has come in dribs and drabs, but as Chad Pawson mentioned, this is the process. And perhaps for a lot of people, they don't understand that.
I mean, it's ironic that Elections BC is getting so much criticism in a year when they have provided election results faster than they ever have in history, right? I mean, the speed with which results came on election night was remarkable because of the tabulators. I mean, I've covered a lot of elections as a reporter, you know, a lot of late nights eating pizza at 1 a.m. in the morning. And like we basically announced all the results an hour after things closed, right? And even this late counting has been quicker than it has been in the past. I don't have the exact numbers at my fingertips, but my recollection is the famous 2017 election. I think it was at least 2 weeks, if not longer, before we did these final counts. And the irony too is that it's precisely because Elections BC takes the integrity of the election process seriously that there is a bit of a delay, right? Like they want to make sure that all of the secrecy seals come back and they double check that the person hasn't already voted before they count their vote. So, you know, I mean, I'm an election nerd. It's maybe not surprising that I'm a big fan of Elections BC, but in all of my interactions with them over many, many years covering elections, they take their job incredibly seriously. And I think it's a little bit sad that some people are taking a swing at them. I think it may be a bit overblown. A lot of us journalists spend time on Twitter, and I think it's maybe just a handful of Twitter trolls that are, raising these crazy conspiracy theories and complaining about how long it's taking and stuff like that. I think most serious people on both sides of the aisle know that they're doing a good job and they're doing the best they can. And in fact, they're doing a remarkably fast job compared to past elections.
Hey, Chad, I'm going to jump in here and just ask a question because I really appreciate your work, and I appreciated your posting about talking about these mail-in ballots. So it's interesting because, in my social circles leading up to today, we talking a lot like who is the person who mails in their ballot and who are they most likely to vote for and who most likely is an absentee voter and who are they most likely to vote for. So the question I'm winding up to you is just, do you have a sense of why the NDP does better or has now done quite a bit better with mail-in ballots?
So I think historically there's been a few different theories of this. I mean, more so I think we had a better sense of it around absentee ballots that if you sort of think like an absentee ballot is someone that is outside of their riding on election day. So, I mean, the traditional way you often think about it is university students, right? So someone lives in Kelowna, they're studying at UBC on election day, they're at UBC, they cast their ballot there, right? So that's one of them. I mean, another one could be like unionized workers in some fields like nursing that work crazy shifts. Maybe they end up outside their riding more than others. With mail-in ballots, it's interesting because I think there's kind of like what happened in the pandemic. And I think the possibility that what happened in the pandemic kind of had an echo in 2024, that you had this weird situation where in 2020, you had 30% of people vote by mail. The pandemic wasn't as polarized here as it was in the States, but, all else being equal, maybe people that were more likely to feel nervous about going to a voting station, more likely to vote NDP. So you saw the margin increase a little bit. But then I think what happened, and I've seen this in my own sort of social circles or among relatives, people got used to mail-in voting in 2020. And so then they did it again in 2024, right? Like the numbers in 2024 are nowhere near what they were in 2020, but they're still way, way, way more than what we had in 2017 and before. We used to have like 6,000 mail-in ballots across the whole province. This election is going to be like 100,000, right? And I think what may have just happened is something as simple as a lot of people got comfortable with mail-in voting. And because they got comfortable in 2020, a lot of them were NDP voters, right? And then you do have this other thing, which is going to be very hard for us to sort out, which is that we weren't counting all the mail-in ballots this weekend. We were counting the late mail-in ballots. And for whatever reason, whether I've been joking, it's because they're procrastinators, but maybe it's also someone that's more undecided, that's a very different voter than maybe someone that gets in their mail-in ballot, the day after they receive the package because they've always known who they're going to vote for.
I find it's really interesting, though, because you still have to mail the ballot in time to get to a deadline. So you're still most likely, even if you're making a decision late, you're still posting it with enough days to get there. And so, one of my theme thoughts, through this whole campaign was like, do elections matter? How much do elections matter, especially down to the end where we're seeing people voting in advance, we're seeing people 100,000 people mailing in their votes. They're already making their minds up. The Conservative platform didn't come out until 4 days before Election Day. So do you even need a platform? So I really think, I'd be happy to know your thoughts, that this election in particular may really change the way parties go about how they're going to campaign, what information they're going to be made available, what they're really going to focus on, even down to mobilizing voters. Maybe mobilizing voters in an early part of a campaign is something that may be at play in our future elections here in BC.
Yeah, I mean, there is the one thing that there's been some confusion about is some people think that as long as the ballot was postmarked on election day, it counts, and that's the reason for the delay. But that's actually not the case. So they have to, as you noted there, like Elections BC has to receive your ballot by, I think it's 8 o'clock on election day. So basically the same time that physical polling places close. You can, and I'm sure there were some people that did this, drop off your mailing ballot thing by hand. So again, if you're such a procrastinator that you don't make your decision until the morning of, you can drive that over to like a district electoral office and drop it off. And those actually small number of mail-in ballots were actually counted today along with the absentee ballots. But I think your broader point about, yeah, I mean, a lot of people are making their decision early. You know, I think it probably stresses how election campaigns have to make sure that they make their case early. They can't assume that they can somehow do a final push, whether it's advertising or interviews and stuff like that at the end, and change people's mind. Although I do think also, I mean, the reality is it's not quite as polarized as it is in the United States here, but a lot of people know from day one who they're going to vote for, right? I mean, you're always kind of dealing with this minority of undecided voters, and those might be the people that are more likely to vote on election day or vote later. The people that kind of, you know, and that could be part of the mail-in voting too, right? People are sort of, I mean, nothing this candidate can say will change my mind, so I might as well get my vote in now, right? So that might also skew a little bit on the mail-in ballots, that there are people that have made up their mind and know they've made up their mind and are not persuadable.
Chad Skelton, data journalist extraordinaire, we appreciate your time. Stay with us. You're watching CBC News BC. If you are just joining us, CBC News is now, our decision desk is projecting the NDP will form government in the province of BC more than a week after election night. We cannot, though, say if it will be a majority government or a minority government. We have two ridings left to call. Those are Surrey-Guildford, where the NDP is now ahead by a small margin, and Courtenay-Comox, which at last check, according to Elections BC, the Conservatives are ahead by a very small margin as well. I'm here with my colleague Chad Pawson, our municipal affairs reporter. CBC News is able to project that NDP candidate Dana LaJeunesse will win in the riding of Wanda Fuca-Malahide, another close race, and that Conservative candidate Christina Lowen will win in the riding of Kelowna Centre. So if you're just joining us, a lot of things happening. These ballots and these votes coming in dribs and drabs, a lot of hitting refresh on Elections BC's website, and we're updating our CBC BC votes page as well. Chad Skelton, we need to do a plug for your website because you have a lot of... pardon me, Chad Skelton no longer with us. We do appreciate his time. Chad Pawson, what do you make of what you heard from Chad Skelton in terms of the process?
Yeah, I think his work's fascinating, that he's delving into historical elections to see how people, in particular, mail in their votes, because that is and vote with, you know, not within their own riding or away and vote, and so that really seems to be a big change for this election. So I think, I mean, his points are really spot on and really showing that the NDP is forming government most likely because of how people decided to mail in their votes. And Chad Skelton making the point that this was something that was done more so in the 2020 election due to the pandemic, and that maybe the NDP voter from 2020 decided to stick with their mail-in vote, and they did that as well. I mean, in my social circles over the past 9 days, we've been thinking about these mail-in votes. We've been talking just a big takeaway that every vote matters here, and that if you need to mail in your vote, it's important to do that. If you are not in your particular riding, but you can go find somewhere else in a different riding to cast your vote, that this is all really important stuff to do. Thinking also just about these races that we're talking about today. You know, in Kelowna, it's a very close race. It's Christina Lowen, you know, a candidate with the Conservatives. She's a mother of four. She's like a childbirth doula, you know, and she has upset, you know, a Kelowna city councillor in
well-known name, Royal Woodridge,
who also worked a lot within regional government and was very instrumental in our wildfire response. So these races are fascinating, where the Conservatives were able to put somebody relatively new to politics and into a place where their message resonated in a place like Kelowna Centre, and were able to defeat, you know, a fairly well-experienced politician. But at the end of the day, we're seeing these close races that the NDP is managing managed to hang on to. With it's looking like, so far, Surrey-Guildford, they're in the lead with 14 votes. You heard Chad Skelton sort of say he believes that that's going to hold. We'll see. There's still probably another 150, or actually about, I think we're around 70 votes now left in that riding. So that's really one of the bellwethers. And then Wanda Fuka-Malahat with Dana La Jeunesse, a Sioux district councillor, being able to hang on there because we've called that riding.
That's correct.
Despite it also being close. I think Courtney Comox is, I think it's about 117 vote difference now.
Right.
So hard to see that one going the other way, but very interesting that was a riding that was completely in play in 2017, the last time we went through this. So, I think after all this, some of our work may be informed by finding out what is special about these ridings. The other thing too, it's 93 seats now, up from 87. So we had a lot of new ridings. We had ridings that were reestablished based on population. So Surrey had 10 ridings, and that was really seen as a battleground. Now we're seeing it play out. I believe it's like you're going to be 7-3 or 6-4. So you kind of split, but also, Conservatives managed to pick up seats in Surrey. So
as well as Richmond.
As well as Richmond,
Yeah,
so just seeing a fascinating way this is played out, but thankful today that we get to call some kind of government with more to come.
There you are. Chad Possum, Municipal Affairs Reporter. We appreciate your work and your analysis. Thank you for joining us here on CBC News BC. Much more on our website, cbc.ca/BC. And a reminder for you, the big takeaway from this, CBC News projecting a decision that the NDP will form government in BC. We don't yet know if it will be a minority or a majority. Much more coming up on all our platforms. I'm Dan Burrett with Chad Possum. Thanks for joining us.